Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Dave's Faves. And today I want to talk to you about another in the seemingly endless series of symphonies by Havergal Brian. Now, Havergal Brian is kind of a cult composer. And, because he wrote 32 symphonies, more or less, and a bunch of other things, and they're kind of garrulous, galumphy, strange, naughty works, or at least some of them are. Not all of them, but that's my point. I'm in the not all of them kind of mood right now, because he really was a fascinating and brilliant composer who had a very personal style, and some of these symphonies are wonderful, but you got to pick them. I am not one of those, they're all equally wonderful kind of people. I think that we need to be selective. I think they're all worth listening to if you like the guy. I mean, if you are curious about his style, they have a place in his oeuvre, and you may want to dig into it and try and figure it out and see how that works. But I don't think it's necessary. I do think the best of them ought to be played, and they ought to be heard, and they deserve an outing. And this disc on Naxos is just fabulous as an entree into his music. Everybody wants to start with Symphony number 1, which was like really number 2, but number 1, the Gothic Symphony, because it's like the biggest symphony ever written in terms of number of forces and length and all of that stuff. And I think that's a terrible mistake, because the Gothic Symphony is just this big fat albatross of a work. Half of it is orchestral, and half of it is this massive choral setting of the Te Deum, which is really it's just a muddle. It's not that it's bad. I just have not yet heard a recording that makes sense of it. And the best one is on Hyperion, and we could talk about it some other time. But what Havergal Brian was best at was writing rather short, pithy, very concentrated works with very abrupt changes of mood and incredibly striking textural contrasts. His style is immediately audible. I mean, he liked to give the brass a lot to do. He liked march music. He liked percussion. He liked wind writing. He liked very strange solos for instruments that don't normally get solos, like the harp or the glockenspiel and xylophone. And he always used like 3 snare drums at once and tubas and euphoniums going along. I mean, he had a really, really distinctive style. And this disc, which features 4 works, 2 tone poems and 2 symphonies, gives us a wonderful sense of his evolution over 60 years. It's just amazing. I mean, a 60-year period. He lived into his 90s. He died in the 1970s, 72. And so you get to really see where he came from and where he went. And when you do that, you realize that he really was an impressive and fascinating voice in 20th century music. He also is one of those composers whose first name should have been his last name and whose last name should have been his first name. Brian Havergal would have sounded a lot easier than Havergal Brian, but we don't have to go there. Anyway, what's on this disc? Well, you get his concert overture. He called these pieces concert overtures. They're not. They're tone poems. I mean, you can call them concert overtures if you want. The first is called For Valour. It's a big, noisy, bombastic piece of ebullient orchestral mayhem with an organ and brass going like crazy. And it was written in 1902 through 1906, so it's very, very early. I mean, he was born in 1876, so he was still pretty mature, but it's an early work. The second piece is called Dr. Merryheart. He also calls that a comedy overture. And again, it's 16 minutes long. It's not short, and it's really a set of variations. He did a bunch of variations pieces. He did his burlesque variations and the variations on a nursery rhyme or old rhyme, which is actually 3 Blind Mice. That's the burlesque variations. I don't know. But he did a bunch of variations, and this is sort of the last of them, of these early works. And it was composed in 1911, 1912. it is, as the notes point out, heavily based on the music of Richard Strauss, particularly Ein Heldenleben and Don Quixote, and uses thematic transformations of a couple simple ideas as he puts Dr. Merryheart through his adventures, including some like Don Quixote, like knightly adventures, as a knight is in, Knights of the Round Table, like not darkness night, and it's just fun. It's a delightful piece of music with some surprisingly light and charming sections. Brian is not a guy you normally think about when you think, light and charming. Then we have Symphony number 11. Now, Symphony number 11 has 3 movements, but they're very, very unconventional. You have an opening adagio, which is extremely beautiful. I mean, again, we don't normally think of Brian as like a lyrical, melodic, beautiful composer in that sense, but this movement is. It's gorgeous. And it's only about 6 minutes long. Then you've got a big, long central scherzo. I mean, like 14 or 15 minutes long. And it too has wonderful tunes. And it goes through a lot of different episodes before sort of winding down. And the finale is only 3 or 4 minutes long, and it's a march. It's one of those big, military, impressive march things that Brian always did very well. He was a great composer of march music, of band music, if you want to call it that, except the strings come along for the ride. And it makes a wonderful finale. The whole thing is about 24, 25 minutes long. And it has a structure like no other symphony of the 20th century, and it works. It works extremely well. So that was composed in 1954. And then we jump to 1960. So we've got 60 years of music on this disc. I mean, wow. And that's really something, isn't it? And it's Symphony number 15, which is one of his one-movement symphonies, and he did those really well. I mean, there were numbers 8 and 9, which were and 10, his sort of initial group. Then there was another batch of one-movement symphonies later on, like 13, 14, 15, 16, somewhere in there. And number 15 is another very, very happy and up-tempo work. And that's all you need to say about it, really. It has different sections which fall into a kind of fast, slow, fast, general shape. But by and large, it's just a humdinger of a symphony, full of character and sudden contrast and those things that we kind of like with Brian and his later style. But it's all very approachable, very, very enjoyable, and quite well performed here by the RTE National Symphony Orchestra under Tony Rowe and Adrian Leeper on Naxos. Really, really interesting, personal and sophisticated music, and it's definitely worth a listen. I think this is probably the best disc out there just to get to know him, if you're really curious about his evolution as a composer and the range of things that he offered. Much better than just these big blowsy works that people like because of their mythological reputation and their sheer size. I mean, this is musical sophistication. There are degrees of intimacy. There are ranges of expression and style. It just gives you the whole package. A wonderful, wonderful disc, and I enjoy it tremendously. And I think you will too. I really do. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.